Welcome to the latest edition of the Google for Business podcast with me, Martin Shervington. So, you want to become an authority? Well, there's no finer man to ask than Mark Traphagen. He's really been seen now as one of the main voices in the SEO space and also has a fine presence on social as well. And he writes. And you put all of that together and you have the makings for exactly what you're looking for to be known as an expert in your field. I really hope you enjoy this one. So welcome Mark Traphagen from Stone Temple Consulting. We've been mates now for a while, a few years.
A few years, boy, in Google Plus years.
Yeah,
like dog years?
We're like dinosaurs, yeah. It is like dog years. We must be at least, 70 years or so. We're aging
yes.
all right. But we connected originally, tell the story, but we connected on Threads originally around, do you want to tell the story? It's romantic, really, isn't it, Mark? About the Eye of Sauron, about our notifications nagging us. What a problem, what a first world problem.
Moonlit night.
Yeah. Now, and I read your book, but you're a writer. This is the thing. You write, you craft stuff, you think about content, which leads in beautifully, see what I did? Because we're going to talk about being an authority, and we're going to talk about Google search, because that was almost where quite a few of us positioned ourselves, which is, this is what this platform can do. You can write content, and it can be within the platform, and it seems that you're able to take reputation into search, the content appearing in search. We understood that the more we wrote on a particular subject, the more people were engaging on that subject from within the community, the more content seemed to surface. You're nodding. They can't hear that on the podcast. But you just nodded, just to let everyone know.
I'm performing an emphatic nod in the positive direction to everything that Martin is saying.
But let's talk about that then. So you wrote a lot. And then you moved from really talking about Google Plus to talking about content marketing. And I know that you're working with Eric around doing similar things for clients and authority still being one factor. What do you think's changed, if anything?
If anything has changed, I think that the importance of establishing authority, and that's a vague term, and I think we're going to probably define it a little bit better during the course of this podcast. But it's moved from being important to being essential. The clutter on the internet is only increasing. And recent studies, such as the one that's been done by Moz in conjunction with BuzzSumo, show that in content that's being put out there, which we know there's an increasing amount of content being put out every day on the internet, that only a very, very tiny minority of that, much less than 1%, much less than 1% of it gets any significant social shares or links, and a much tinier percentage gets both. Now, those aren't the only measure of value, but they certainly are a major measure of value. If people are willing to share something, or if they're willing to put a link to it on their website, that indicates they think it has some importance, and yet only a tiny, tiny bit of that content is getting any of that. So to me, it raises the issue of authority. In particular, how is Google establishing that authority? How are they measuring it? Which I think is the methods of that are rapidly changing and getting much more sophisticated than they used to be.
So let's take the step back then. Let's go for the definition. What is authority to you?
Do we want to speak about it in very general terms or in terms of Google and search?
Let's do both. What
Okay.
the heck?
Yeah, because they're becoming. That's an interesting way for me to phrase the question, if I may say so myself.
Yeah, that's
because
right. You can do the podcast interview.
I
What do you
think
think, Mark? I think that this is a great idea. Yeah.
You can just tune out. I have all my own questions prepared. So, Mark, how wonderful are you?
Yeah.
We'll skip that one. I think that is an interesting way to phrase it, because the Venn diagram of those two things, I believe, is getting the intersection on the Venn diagram is getting bigger all the time. What I mean is, on the one hand, you have what we might call real world authority. What we all recognize in the real world when we recognize somebody is an authority. When we say they're an authority, they're an expert, they're somebody that we pay attention to. They're someone who, let's say someone, or it could be a brand, that we trust. When we say all those things, uh, Google is learning how, at a vast scale, the scale of the World Wide Web, and the scale of all of the entities, as Google calls them out there, that's persons, places, things, concepts that are in the real world. At that scale, Google is learning how to bring those things together, to begin to learn, what do people trust? What do people think of as an authority? What do people look to, and who? And bring that together with how Google search evaluates that. And at a very simplistic level, we any of us that know anything about the history of search and SEO know that primarily for a long period of time, search engines like Google were dependent primarily on things like links. I mean, links from one website to another website. And those links were used as votes of a sort to establish authority. But now what we see in the recent years, Google is becoming much more sophisticated at attempting to learn the way that the very subtle and intricate ways that human beings come to trust someone. And every time I say someone here, it could include something more impersonal like a brand. How they come to look at someone as an authority, and then how to link people to the content coming from those trusted sources.
What do you think the role is then of social as a whole in relation to this?
I think social continues to have somewhat of an indirect role. And by that I mean that all of our testing and everything that we're observing and hearing leads us to believe that social media itself is not, at this point, a direct ranking signal for Google. Meaning, just having a lot of followers on social media, or even being an influencer, whatever that might mean, does not in and of itself influence search rankings. And there's a number of reasons why that is, because it might seem like, and a lot of us thought early on, and even Google, I should say, even Google was saying not that many years ago, Google spokespeople were saying, yeah, we're seriously looking at this. We think social media could be a great signal for us. But they've backed off of that, because what they've seen over time is that social media is very noisy and it's very inconsistent. It's hard to separate the signal from the noise. There's so much going on there, and it's so volatile, and it changes moment by moment. So it's a hard signal for them to trust. But to get to the heart of the matter, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. I think it has incredible value. And I think that primarily that value comes in building real-world authority, getting people to notice you in the first place, pay attention to your content and your opinions and what you're saying, and then hopefully if you're doing a good job at that, those people come to value those things over time. They begin to tell other people about it. They begin to bring people to your content, and it creates a lot of signal out there that actually does affect how a search engine like Google would look at you. And we know from I want to bring up at this point that we know even from some recent patents and some recent patent renewals or updates that our friend Bill Slosky, who is the Google patent expert, has pointed out, that Google continues to be interested in this, and especially at the author level, meaning that they are continuing to look at people who are creating content online and the actual authors of that content, and trying to evaluate, do people trust that author on a given topic? Do they often point to their content? And if so, then shouldn't that have some bearing on how they show up in search?
Let's talk about something that's probably a little contentious, but do you remember, I know you can remember, do you remember the frenzy that was when we found out that profiles had a page rank?
Oh my, yes.
Before the tool just disappeared or stopped working on it. Mm-hmm. So do you want to sort of start off with a bit on PageRank, and then we'll talk about the profiles on PageRank, because this is about authority to some extent. But we saw this, and then people may not realise that this was all going on 3 years ago, and it's all gone quiet because we haven't got the tools to prove it anymore. But do you want to explain how that could tie in to authority?
Yeah, and this is in reference to Google Plus. We should explain, we're talking about Google Plus profiles in particular here. Yeah, many of us who are in the search world, the SEO world, when Google Plus first emerged, we were paying very careful attention to it, because Google themselves were clear in saying that Their intention at that time was to tie Google Plus into everything on Google. And then everything on Google would be centered around Google Plus and the Google Plus profiles. Well, it's, like I said, that got our attention. And we said, what are they doing with that? What does that mean? Over time, as we were active on Google Plus, I began to notice that some of my Google Plus posts were actually ranking in Google search, the posts themselves, and in regular search, not just for people who followed me, but for anyone. And that fascinated me. Why was that? And then particular got my attention when, as often happens on a network like Google Plus, someone would share something, and then a good number of people would reshare that post on Google Plus. When you reshare somebody's post, it brings the whole content of that post into your post, and each Google Plus post is seen like a page for Google. And so that content becomes part of your content. And we would see that certain powerful and influential users, like myself or like yourself, often would outrank the original poster on Google for that share. And that led to the question of why is that happening? So long story short, after some investigation, determined at that time the most visible factor, and it is only one factor, but the most visible factor that we used to have access to was what Google calls PageRank. And PageRank is, at a simplest level, is a score that Google assigns to every page on the web that it knows about. And that score is an indication of the authority Google places in that page. Very complicated how that comes about. It's primarily through links, but a number of different factors. But as you alluded a moment ago, we discovered that every page on Google Plus had a PageRank score. As you said, that we used to be able to see a simplified expression of that score. The real score is much more complex, but Google no longer makes that public. But we were able to see it, and I did extensive testing that I published about that showed that indeed there was a high correlation between the PageRank of a profile, because each profile has a PageRank also, and its ability to rank posts in Google search. So all that technical discussion, it boils down to the importance of Google was serious about using Google Plus as one means to evaluate entities, to evaluate people and brands as well, and evaluate their relative authority in the world. Just one means among many, but it was a fascinating exploration.
And we're assuming that that's still there.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any reason to assume that it's not. The only question would be how much influence it has anymore. For example, I think there's pretty good evidence that Google has toned down the direct effect of that. It is much, much harder these days for anyone to rank a Google Plus post in regular search. It can happen, but it usually only happens if the post has very unique keyword that that someone is searching for. It's what we call a long tail keyword. It means it's not something that would be more commonly searched. There'd be a lot of other web pages that could outrank it. However, where we see the effect still very profound and very strong, and an effect that most people are not aware of, is in personalized search. This is where Google has seemed to determine that it has real value. And very quickly, what I mean by that is if I follow you, Martin, which I do on Google Plus, I have you in my circles, have for a long time, and you have created a post on Google Plus that has a unique phrase in it that I search for on Google, and I'm logged into my Google account, there's a high probability that your post will come up on my first page of Google, and by the way, have what we call a rich snippet result that looks very similar to the old Google authorship results. In other words, it will show up not only on my first page, but it will show up with your profile image next to it and your name on that post, which highlights it, makes it stand out in the search results to me. So all that to say, and that, by the way, that works for brand pages as well. So Google is saying, like, if I have bothered to circle a person or a brand on Google Plus, and I search something relevant that they've posted there, it's highly likely I'd be interested in that. And they actually boost it to page 1 of search.
Let's talk about something else. Twitter. So we've all been getting a lot more active on Twitter. So those of us that have been around Google Plus for a long time, we spread our wings. See what I did? And we went over. I didn't get a smile out of that. You can't see it on the podcast. Now you're smiling now. But we recognised that we were probably too focused on one platform. So many of us said, right, we have to make sure we don't neglect that. And many people didn't do this, and they had presence everywhere else. But Twitter, as of this year, has done a deal with Google called the Fire Hose deal, or casually called that, which means that Google has access to Twitter's data feed on a Fire Hose, but also tweets are now appearing very close to the top of search when you're searching for certain things like people. What do you think this means, Matt Traphagen?
Well, it certainly means Google has an interest in what's going on in Twitter. That's the no-brainer expert evaluation here. That's why you come here for the authority. Folks.
Yeah, no, but an interest. We'll just keep it vague as an interest.
Yeah.
It's
still. I want to couch it still because we haven't seen any discernible change in what I said a few minutes ago, which is that we still think that Google is rather shy about using social media as a direct ranking signal, and this means that. What I mean by that is just posting something on Google Plus or on Twitter in this example, in and of itself, does not cause any ranking change to the thing that post might link to. First of all, the links on almost all social media, including Google Plus and Twitter, are no followed, which means, to make that simple, non-technical, means that Google gives the ability for webmasters, people who might place links, to indicate or signal on a link that Google should not follow it, which means simply that they don't pass any authority through that link. And the links on almost all social media are no followed, marked that way, which means that they do not pass any Google authority on. However, that's not to say, and we've heard some very vague but interesting comments and rumblings from Google spokespeople about this, that something like Twitter has meaning to them, in particular for things like discovery of what's hot, what topics are people interested in talking about. Are there particular pages? Because while those links, let's say a link on Twitter to your page is not followed, it doesn't pass any authority from Twitter to your site, it's still followed in the sense that Google can crawl that link, which means that Google's robot, its machine, clicks on that link, much in the same way that you or I would, and goes and looks at the page that link leads to. And so that can lead to Google discovering what's new on the web, and possibly again what people are talking about, what are paying attention to. And one area that we think they may be experimenting with is if a particular page on the web seems to be hot on a network like Twitter, a lot of people are talking about it, a lot of people are linking to it, a lot of people are retweeting those links, then Google might be doing some what we call sandboxing experiments with that, which means not changing the ranking factor of that page necessarily on a permanent basis, but at least temporarily bumping that page up in search results for everyone or for a select group of people.
And we saw that one test that ran Fishkin, didn't? Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah. So why do they do that? They do that to kind of like it's analogous to the old expression of throwing the spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. So sometimes Google will bump something up in search results temporarily and see if people click on it. Do people respond to it? And when they click on it, how do they behave? Do they click on it and then immediately come back to the search results and click on something else, which might indicate that they weren't seeing something of value there? But if they click on it and they don't come back, then that might be stick-worthy. Maybe it should rank higher than it did. Now, again, I want to be careful to say we don't have explicit evidence that Google is doing this, but we have some very interesting anecdotal evidence, some very interesting testing that seems to establish that they may be doing this. So that may be some overt ways in which Google is using Twitter to influence search right now.
Yeah. I said at the start, you like writing, don't you?
Yeah, I love it. And I love the fact that I found a career where I get to write.
Yeah. So, I mean, in establishing authority, we've been talking about writing, but I know you've been doing the videos lately. And I think that's another whole platform, YouTube, as well as other places you can put the videos. But for a business, what do you think? Where do you think they should start? From a strategic point of view, what should they be considering? And then what units are the first things you think they should start putting out? Blog posts or videos or both, or where do you begin?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question.
I'm glad that you're glad.
Because I'm going to interview myself again by taking it in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, all right. You're now going to ignore the question, and it's all right. It's okay. Go
on. No, it is a very good question, but I mean that could be huge, and we could do a whole podcast just on that topic. What kind of content should you be creating? But I'm going to take it in terms of the topic that we've been talking about, which is authority online.
Perfect. That would have been a really good question. In terms of authority online, what? Okay, and then you do the rest.
Yeah, you could edit in now to make it question from the beginning. I think the importance here is a way of thinking that people and brands need to have, and too often, because we've emphasized so much, maybe to a fault in the SEO world, direct results. Like I'm going to create this page, this piece of content, and I've got to have certain keywords on it, and I've got to do this or that trick, and I got to go build links to it and everything like that to build the authority of that page. And so we concentrate so much on the one-off, if you will. How am I going to get this page, or how am I going to get my site to rank for this particular keyword? When I say keyword for non-SEO people, that just means a phrase that people search for on Google or a search engine. And I think we're missing the forest for the trees in that. What we do at Stone Temple Consulting, if you come and look at our content, we produce all kinds of content, text, video, audio podcasts, all kinds of things. And we publish it not only on our own site, but both Eric Enga and I publish frequently on other sites as well, put content out there in Moz, Search Engine Land, Convince and Convert. We do podcast interviews like this. What is the SEO value of me doing this interview with you? Well, here it is. All that stuff, okay? It's everything that you do that increases your audience. And by audience, I mean people who begin to know who you are, know what you're about, and more importantly, over time, come to trust that you know what you're talking about in that area. You begin to build your brand identity. And that can be a personal brand. Like, Martin, you're certainly a personal brand. I'm a personal brand out there. People know us. They identify us with certain things. They say, oh, you need to, you're thinking about A, B, or C. You need to follow Martin Shervington, or you need to talk to him, or you need to read his post on this. The more that happens, you're increasing your audience out there. You're also increasing the likelihood and the chances that you will be generating the signals that become meaningful to a search engine like Google in terms of your authority in search. And so what I'm trying to say here, maybe I'm not being too clear about it, but trying to say is that it's holistic, that you are building, remember what I said in the beginning, that Venn diagram, that more and more we're seeing the things that build your authority in the real world, stuff that people have known about for centuries, right, is more and more intersecting with the things that Google is evaluating to say, who's an authority on this? Whose content should we put up first when people search for relevant things on that? So I guess my answer is, that you do all those things with the intent, not just of building some one-off SEO value, but with the larger intent of getting the message out there and connecting with a dedicated audience, a dedicated fan base who understand when we think Mark Traphagen, when we think Stone Temple Consulting, we think Martin Shervington, we think these certain things, and we will tell other people that they should listen to them.
So in a way, we talk about being known for something, isn't it? And being known within a niche, and people go, okay, that's the person to go to for that, or that's the company to go to. So I think that, you got me thinking now. Well, it's almost as a starting point strategically is what you want to be known for, and not be thinking in terms of keywords. It's going back to that higher level and just say, okay, let's actually spend the time and consider that higher level frame. So, for instance, this podcast is Google for Business, so we have lots of different aspects because that's what I want my identity to be known for. Then you produce the content from there. Put it into presentations, do the podcast, do the videos, do the blog post, do all of that stuff that then supports underneath that is the intent, and it becomes signal. But the piece that I was going to add into your the process that you're talking about is essentially when people socially share, when people link back from the website, when people are quoting, when people are out at the pub talking about you, all of that is linking back essentially, whether it's real world or online. It's all the same sort of process because people go, it's Mark you want to go to. It just happens that online you have these digital signals, for instance, somebody linking back from a website to your site or to an article on a third-party blog. And in the real world, it just happens it's conversational. And somebody then takes down your name, writes it down, and goes and looks for you online. So this is where the overlaps come in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's brilliantly said, because you can't ignore the effect of that. When I see a link out there, somebody links from a high-value site to a piece of my content, I don't really know in most cases, why did that link come about? There's hundreds of ways that could happen. But and I know anecdotally from talking to people, that it does happen sometimes from much of what goes on offline. And it might be that, that person was, as you put it, in a pub, in a conversation with a friend, and they're talking about a topic, and this guy said, oh, you should look at this article by Mark Traphagen on that topic. And the guy goes and looks at it and maybe starts to read sees a couple other things I've written. He sees some of our videos. He says, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about that. And I get on his radar screen. And then one day he's writing an article on his blog that's relevant to what what I talk about. And what comes to mind? Who am I going to link to as a reference on that? I'm going to link to Mark's article. So what I was saying is that you're creating through your content, through your presence, through showing up in many different venues, online and offline. This includes the value of things like speaking at conferences, networking at meetups, all the different offline opportunities that there are. You're creating over time a web of possibilities, and that you want that web to be ever growing, because out there on that web will be lights that will go off.
It's fascinating that it's not the map that a lot of people have for this stuff, is it? Mm-hmm. And we've built that map, and you almost want to say there's a degree of serendipity that happens. In other words, it's not totally in your control, because people are paying attention to all the things that you do, and you may not even know. You don't know if people are necessarily reading your content. You can tell the numbers, but you don't know if they've read 20 articles and are just about to make that purchase decision and get in touch with you or invite you to speak at a conference or what have you. There's a lot of actions that you've got to take to build up, and there's a degree of faith, really, that you've got to have that this is building your brand and that you are. And it's to be balanced, being very open again about it, against the social engagement for the sake of social engagement. It isn't about the numbers of plus ones, about numbers of retweets. It's about doing good work. It's about the quality of the work and that being reflected in the social engagement, not chasing the social engagement using cat gifs. We almost got through a whole interview without mentioning cat gifs. But do you know what I mean? But this is the thing. If people don't understand what's going on with social, it isn't about the sort of low-level content, which it can be useful to break things up, but it's about producing the best work that you can so that you are known to be, and we talked about this recently with Eric, it's be an expert or go home. I think, you guys, you see it that way, you've got to do good work.
Yeah, I mean, recently we've had some rather startling and sobering messages from real authorities in the field. I think of Rand Fishkin of Moz, who recently did one of his Whiteboard Friday videos. The title of the video was "Why Good Unique Content is Not Good Enough Anymore." For several years now, we've been telling people, Google's been telling people, using those phrases like, you've got to have good, unique content. And Rand says, guess what now? For just about anything you search, there's at least 10 people or 10 sites, the first 10 on Google, who all have good, unique content. Congratulations. You're not going to, pop in there and outdo them. So now, he said, you've got to have what he calls 10x content, which means it's got to be 10 times better than all 10 of those things on the first page of Google for whatever you're writing about or producing a video about or a podcast or whatever. That's intimidating. That's a little frightening and scary. But it's the world of the entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs understand this about their businesses. It doesn't do good enough just to have a great idea and show up and say, here's my great idea. You've got to find ways to express that idea and to get that idea connected with people in a way that makes heads turn, that stands out. So, yeah, we're talking about the hard work here of it's everything analogous. Last time, this is on my top of my mind because last night I was at a talk by one of the co-founders of Netflix. Was last night at High Point University here. Fascinating talk, and he's now gone on from Netflix. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's an angel investor, and just talking about entrepreneurship. I think there's so many tie-ins to that. You've got to be an entrepreneur online, which means that you've got to show up lots of places. You have to make your presence known. You have to have something unique to say, unique value to add, and find a way to express that in all the noise makes you emerge as signal that people value and they're going to pay attention to.
There we go. Mark Traphagen, everybody, where can they find you?
I love it when people ask that question these days because I have a very simple answer. Google me. I own the first page of Google for my name. And you might say, well, Mark Traphagen, that's not a common name, so it's not so hard, and that is true. I do thank my family, my heritage for giving me an SEO-friendly name. But there was another Mark Traphagen, a prominent, well, still is.
Who's now on page 3, yeah.
Right, well, page 2. But he's a fairly well-known intellectual property lawyer, shows up in a lot of news resorts like that. And I used to pretty much split the first page of Google with him, but now it's all me. So you'll find all the places where you can find me. Anywhere you find me on that first page of Google, I will be active there. You can contact me there.
There we go. Thank you very much, sir. Wonderful.
Thank you, Martin. Always enjoyed to talk with you.
Lovely, mate. Cheers. This is Martin Sherrington. Thank you for listening to the Google for Business podcast. See you next time.